Hi, everyone. Today we have a very special guest, Katharine Schweitzer. You won't want to miss this as we are going to be talking about project management certifications to include the PMP, PSM, CSM, and PSPO. We're also going to touch on Agile, Scrum, Kanban, Waterfall, and hybrid project management practices. Katharine will also be sharing some tips for entering the project management career field. I'm Kandis Porter, the founder and managing director of Effective Flow Connections, a management consulting company. I'm a certified PMP and have a master's degree in project management from George Washington University. I teach project management, and it is one of my absolute favorite subjects to discuss. Hi, Katharine. I'd like to ask you to please tell me about yourself and your project management experience.
So my name is Katharine Schweitzer. I moved to Reno in 2013. I was initially a philosophy professor. I got all of my undergraduate and graduate degrees in philosophy, and I taught philosophy at UNR for 6 years. But I decided to make a career pivot into project management. A lot of people in my life are engineers, and project management is a track within engineering once you are successful at being an individual contributor. And when I learned more about what my friends who are engineers and project managers did, I thought this is exactly what I want to do. So I got my PMP certification that allowed me to get the entry level, not necessarily entry level, but a credential that showed that I understood a framework and could be hired in a project management role. I got my first job as a project professional in 2019. And in 2020, I started work as a Scrum Master in an IT department at Renown.
That sounds like great experience. I will work with a lot of organizations, and sometimes they'll start out by thinking that project management keeps them from doing their job, or it's a little bit of red tape. They really start to implement some of the refined processes. They love it because it actually helps them do their jobs.
True. And I think what good project managers do is show to stakeholders the value that the contributors on the team are doing. And sometimes individual contributors are too busy doing the work to see the larger picture and to have that communication. So you need someone who's a project manager to do that outreach, communication, stakeholder engagement. And if you've got a good project manager who can highlight the work, that just makes the contributions of the team even more prominent in the organization.
Absolutely. I think value is the key word there. How can you show or prove the value, and people will want to get on board. Well, what are your favorite project management tools or software to keep you on track?
At Renown, where I work now as a Scrum Master, we use Microsoft Azure DevOps. And if a company's a Microsoft shop, I highly recommend DevOps. It is a really nice way of creating teams, creating sprints, tracking the items in your team backlog. And I've found that there's a lot of value in that. I know that there's so many tools out there. Because YouTube knows that I'm a project manager, I get so many ads for like Asana, Trello, Monday.com. But I think the organization that you're working in will really set the tone of what tools are appropriate. On my first job as a project professional, we were more a waterfall type project, and so we used Microsoft Project. But because I was very junior, I was more consuming the products of MS Project rather than working in the tool. And so that gave me insight into how team members who are not themselves project managers interpret the outputs and artifacts of the project management tool. So I take special care as a Scrum Master to see how my teammates are using the DevOps board. They spend a different kind of time in the tool than I do as a Scrum Master. So I want to know what works for them, as well as what works for me as someone who spends a ton of time in the tool. But in my personal life, to be honest, I love every morning when I start work, taking out a sheet of computer paper, folding it in half, writing what my meetings are for the day and my 3 goals and objectives. So in some ways, I do really appreciate the pen and paper tactile tool for my own work. But when you're collaborating with a team and when other people who are in different levels of your project need to see the results, something like Azure DevOps or Jira, places that give you the graphics and the easy dashboards to see the project progress, those are really important.
There isn't, in my opinion, a one size fits all for any type of software, any type of reports that you can pull from project management programs. It really is, who are my stakeholders and what do they need? including those project team members? What specialized training or need to know information can I help get them so that they can be successful in their role? Okay, Katharine, how do you go about approaching the best project management methodology, such as Agile, Waterfall, Hybrid?
Great question, because the context will really matter. And where you are in the organization or in the project will really matter. You might not even have a choice in deciding the methodology, but I think there's something to be learned from all of them. Some people enter project management from one methodology. So for example, some people have only known Agile, even though Agile is a pretty new project management methodology. It's been around for 20 years. And so if you're just entering the field, you might have only worked in an Agile or Scrum environment. And that's great. There are practices about delivering value early and often to customers and working collaboratively. Those are perfect. But I really value the traditional project management waterfall style as well. I mean, I got my PMP certification first on my project management journey, and I appreciate knowing terms like how to define the critical path on a schedule, knowing how to create a risk register or how to talk about risk, how to create a stakeholder engagement plan. Those are technical things within project management that sometimes can get a little lost if you're in an Agile project that's just concerned about delivering for the next sprint or working on the items in the backlog. So even Kanban, Kanban's a flow method, whereas Agile is a method where you sort of plan in advance what work you're going to do in your sprints. And even within my department, we've thought about, well, should we have a more pull Kanban style where when the work is completed, then you take the next item on the track, or whether it's important to have sprints that sort of begin and end your journey for that particular time period of the work that you're completing. So I would say just learning about all of them. Even if you're in an environment where you're only doing one or the other, there are concepts and terms from other project management methodologies that I think really can add value to your project management practice.
I love a lot of what you said there, especially the Kanban. Sometimes people try to overcomplicate it, and Kanban, it can be as simple as your piece of paper with here's what is not started but is on my list. And then once I start it, I can color code it or move it over into my in progress, and then I could cross it off the list or move it over to complete. It's just really that visual way of managing your projects. And a lot of people, especially team members, they're visual people. If you're looking at this board with sticky notes and you can move them, it feels like you're making progress on your project.
So true. And I think even in Scrum or more traditional Agile methodologies, we incorporate those Kanban practices by having the visual representation of the work, what's started, what's in progress, what's completed. And if you have too many things that are in progress and not enough in completed, then that's an opportunity for the Scrum Master to say, is there some reason why you're not able to finish that? Is there something that you need from someone else? And so I really appreciate, for example, with Microsoft Azure boards, that we have a view that's more user story oriented, and then a view that's more task board oriented, and we can just toggle between the two.
I'm really loving Smartsheet lately. They have a card view that they've incorporated. And so you have your grid view, which very much looks like a typical project schedule. And then you can click on your Gantt view so you can see the timeline. But then you could switch it to card view, and it organizes all of the tasks into that not started, in progress, or completed. And if you drag them around, it moves them into the correct, location if you go back to grid view. So it's really cool that software and technology is now coming up with options for that visual way of doing things, even with traditional or waterfall style of project management.
So true, because if team members or stakeholders can have access to that, then you no longer have to have someone who's presenting Word documents or PDFs of that. And it takes that Agile principle of reducing documentation to heart as well.
I know that hybrid project management, it's this new buzz thing that's come about in the last several years. And it's been really interesting when I've been talking to organizations. It's basically just people taking the best of both worlds. Here's a little bit of waterfall that works for us. We want to create a work breakdown structure to kind of be our backlog of what we need to work on, but we want to do it in time boxes, in sprints. So when people ask, what does hybrid project management look like? from my experience, it completely varies from organization to organization. Within your organization, use anything that is really hybrid?
I would say we lean more towards the Agile methodology. We don't have things like project charters or risk registers, but I think maybe that's because I'm more of an operations role. This is how we just organize the work of the department rather than a discrete project. But even within my work as a Scrum Master, there are some initiatives that I'm responsible for, and knowing those terms or having those concepts in the back of my head helps me to think about, okay, who are the stakeholders for this particular initiative? What are the risks that I might face? What do I need to do to mitigate those risks? And so even if it doesn't result in artifacts, I think just having that knowledge helps you to be a more confident project manager.
Can you tell me about your experiences obtaining some of the certifications that you mentioned? I know that you mentioned specifically Project Management Professional and the PMI-ACP. Can you let everyone know what these are, road that you took, and how you feel about it?
Well, as I said or alluded to earlier, sometimes people become project managers after they've become competent individual contributors in their disciplines. So that's a normal path for an engineer. But for people who weren't in a discipline or a field that has project management, you sort of need to be able to show how your prior experience translates into project management skills. So my graduate education in the first 6 years of my career were all in higher education, which has so many project-based works, but until I started learning about project management, I wouldn't have used those terminologies to describe what I was doing. So if you haven't been in a discipline as an individual contributor that has project management, you're going to need something on your resume to show how your prior experience translates. And if you're looking into project management, if you do a Google search, you'll come across the Project Management Institute, which is the body that has the project management professional exam. And so I started with my PMP. The barriers to entry are fairly minimal. If you've been a professional for a number of years, you likely meet the experience requirements for leading projects. I took the 35 hours of project management education, signed up for the exam, studied my butt off, and I was so just grateful to pass and to have that knowledge. It really gives you a framework to talk in business language about the work that you do when you're coordinating and managing projects. So I started with my PMP. And I think for many people, that's the industry standard because when you're doing contracting, when you are doing a long-term project, the traditional project management methodologies are really important in those spaces. But once I learned about Agile, I knew that I wanted to get those certifications under my belt too. So the CSM, which is from Scrum Alliance, before COVID, really required a 2-day in-person class. So I just found a class that worked with my schedule, traveled to the place that it was held, and I really enjoyed getting to meet with other people who were working in the project management space, especially since I was so new to the profession. So that was the CSM, which for many people is an entry-level Scrum certification, especially if you're a team member rather than a product owner. Team member, product owner, Scrum Master, those are the 3 main roles in an Agile team. Many people start out in the Scrum Master role. The Scrum Master is explaining the theory and principle behind Agile, so it's applicable in all those domains. There's also certifications that you can get from Scrum Alliance, and a benefit of those particular certifications is that they don't require any formal training. You can go through the content on your own. It's basically just the Scrum Guide, and they have practice tests that you can take. So I earned my PSM, or my Professional Scrum Master, and my PSPO exam. I took those through Scrum Alliance. And then recently I took a class through Scaled Agile. So I don't work in an organization that is large enough to have Agile at an enterprise level. So Scaled Agile is for very large organizations that are committed to introducing Agile at all levels. I loved the online learning experience. I took it in May, so that it was after the sort of pandemic hit and a lot of the in-person classes were on hold. But I loved learning about how Agile teams work at scale. I mean, in the Scaled Agile framework, there's something called an Agile release train, which is 50 to 150 people. And knowing how to coordinate teams at that size was something that I didn't have experience in, just learning about Scrum as a team framework. So I was really grateful to be able to take the Scaled Agile training and to get my SSM. The last training that or the last certification that I just completed was my PMI Agile Certified Professional exam, which
again.
thank you so much. It was so exciting. So the PMI-ACP requires that you have 8 months of experience in an Agile role before you can meet the qualifications. And so I started my first Agile role in January. So in August, I took the exam. And I really appreciated being reminded that how Agile works at any one particular organization is just a small facet of how the Agile theory and philosophy and techniques can be practiced. And so going through the prep book that I used and listening to podcasts and training just helped me to broaden my understanding of Agile, whereas in the first months of my being a Scrum Master, I was really focused on doing Agile the way my organization did. So I just love learning, and there's so many places where you can get free online training. The certification exams cost money because it costs money to staff and to develop those. But I think with respect to the value you can get from the certification, it's so easy compared to trying to get a master's degree.
If someone was looking at kind of moving into the project management career field, is there one that you would recommend?
I would probably start with the Scrum PSM certification. I think it takes $200 to sit for the test. It's all online. It doesn't require online proctoring, and you really only need to read the Scrum Guide to be able to show that you know what an Agile project would look like. Because it doesn't have any education requirements or experience requirements, I think it's a great entry point because the content is going to be something that you'll see on all of the other certifications. But whereas with the PMI's PMP, you need to meet education and experience requirements, which sometimes are a barrier for folks. And with classes like CSM, even though they've had more online offerings, it's still a 2-day class. And so I think the PSM is just a great place to test your feet into Agile project management.
What was the most challenging exam in your opinion?
Oh my word. The PMP is so hard. It really is an exhaustive soup to nuts presentation of project management. And there's just so much that you need to know from a technical perspective to do well on that exam. So I think that still is the gold standard in terms of showing that you really know your technical chops in project management. But I have to admit, I failed on my first try the PSPO test, which is offered through Scrum Alliance. I'd been working as a Scrum Master for like 5 months. I'd already done my CSM and my PSM, so I thought I knew the Scrum Guide. But it is a test that really gets to the nitpicky details about what roles and responsibilities were. So I was not expecting to not pass that test on the first try, but it was a good experience because it reminded me not to get too cocky in thinking that just because I knew how Agile works in my current role, that I was an expert on Agile as a whole.
I appreciate you sharing that. You know, and I often tell people that ask about the certification or the certification exams that you can't assume because you've been a project manager and you have all of this experience that you can go and sit for the test and pass it, because it's very specific on the way that the certifying authorities want you to be, you know, speaking their language or the process they want you to use. So you really do have to put effort into learning the content. And I agree with you. I think that the PMP certification exam, it was a big undertaking. I went through a boot camp and then I studied for 3 solid months. And at the end of that test, when I hit submit, I was 50-50 on if I thought I passed it or not. I was exhausted.
Likewise.
I am so happy though that I got introduced to the PMP certification. And in 2021, I'm actually going to be teaching boot camp. They are rolling out their new certification exam in January 2021. The new PMBOK, the 7th edition, is going to be deploying. And PMI has also restructured their training partners completely different from how they've done it in the past.
So excited for you as an educator. I mean, I just think of what a baby I was with respect to the field when I first started my PMP training and how much I learned And so I'm sure that the new students who are going to be introduced to the new curriculum, I've looked at some of the changes to it, and it seems like it's really only value adds in terms of making the processes more concise and focusing more on value and not just maybe the traditional artifacts that had been produced in the past. So I'm really excited for the next generation of people to be PMP certified.
I completely agree. And if you recall, with the sixth edition, they packaged up an Agile guide. And that was kind of the first introduction into Agile. And now they're actually incorporating it. That's going to be one of the big changes for the new certification exam, is that they're introducing Agile into, the PMI way, which I love.
Yeah, because you don't want the value to be only at the end of the project, especially if you're in a multi-year project. You never know what sort of contingencies can happen. And so if you can regularly build in showing value to the folks who are going to be using the output of the project, it's a win-win.
Well, what advice would you give someone who is interested in getting into project management, just starting out?
My two pieces of advice is learn as much as you can and network. So on the learning front, there is so much out there on the internet for free. There's so many podcasts about project management. There's so many YouTube channels, including this one. There's so much great content that people who are in Agile management consulting and just large organizations are adopting Agile. And so there's so many places on the PMI's website, on Agile Scrum Alliance and scrum.org. There's so many resources. So you really don't have any excuse to not learn if you're interested in moving into this field. Sometimes when people ask me what books I would recommend, there are books that I would recommend, but for the initial steps, there's just so much on the internet for free before you buy the PMBOK, before you buy some specific books. So just learn as much as you can. The second is network. I've found so reassuring and invigorating how generous people in the project management community have been to me. I mean, on many organizations and in many teams, you only need a small number of project managers because the largest number of people are the people who are actually doing the work as individual contributors. So sometimes project management can seem a little bit lonely because you might be the only one who's a project manager in your organization or on your team, or one of a few. And so I've really benefited from the PMI chapters. We've got one in Northern Nevada, and the dinner meetings where they have education and just meeting people outside of the industry that you're currently working in or the industry that you think you might be working in. It's just so exciting to see how the skills of project management can translate into manufacturing, into healthcare, into other sorts of industries. Even if you're in a location where there isn't a lot of physical activity, either because of the size of your community or because of what we're dealing with the COVID pandemic, LinkedIn is an amazing outlet to have conversations about project management. If you find someone as a result of listening to a podcast interview with them or seeing something that they've published in a blog post or article, connect with them on LinkedIn and send a personalized message. And if they're receptive, start a conversation. I have really benefited from not being afraid to reach out to someone who's in an industry or in a role that interests me, just asking what their trajectory is or what their advice is. So I found that people really do want to help and nurture people who are earlier in their careers. So I would just encourage to network as much as you can.
I think the project management world is such a tight-knit community. I've made a lot of valuable connections, and it's never boring because there are so many different types of projects, ways of executing them, all the way from NASA projects that go on for years and years and years to smaller scale projects that may be over in a couple of months or 6 months. And so I find that there is never a dull moment in our community and always really good conversation going on. Are you open to people reaching out and asking you questions?
Please find me on LinkedIn. My name is Katharine Schweitzer. The spelling of my first and last name will be in this video. Yeah, I would love to know what your journey is, and if I can be of assistance in any way, I would love to.
Thank you so much for joining me, Katharine. I have to say, you share such incredible content on LinkedIn. So I'm honored to be connected with you and learning from you. I feel like I've learned a lot from you today and a lot about you.
Thank you so much, Kandis.
I hope you enjoyed this content. Please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. You can find it by clicking on the link above or searching Kandis Porter. We have a lot more great topics coming your way soon.